Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us both on Zoom and on live stream to this Friends of Europe's Policy Insight on turning a blind eye, the human cost of trafficking. What we are looking at here today is not to rethink what the problem is. So I want to start off by saying this very deliberately. There are many debates on this topic that aim to look at the problem and simply feel as if you are not able to tackle it or address it and feel a sense of helplessness, yet actually feeling a real sense of the moral failure of organizations, agencies, nation states and others to tackle something which happens on our doorstep and within Europe on a day-to-day basis, and which many of our cities actually profit from in a number of ways. I'm very pleased that today, as a result of that focus, which is about thinking through the policy ideas, recommendations and developments we need to have in place, rather than simply feeling that sense of shada about the problem, is to actually think what can be done, what needs to be improved, what do we have in place that currently doesn't work, what are the gaps in the system and how we can improve them, or think about new policy initiatives. The European Commission has established a new pact on asylum and immigration. Does that fare well in the context that we find ourselves in? So I'm very pleased that we're able to bring you today 4 perspectives which are relevant to that starting point about what do we do to improve the situation of human trafficking. So we have the European Commission Director General that's responsible for this area. We have the Border Management Agency, Frontex, that's responsible for border management, as it is in its title, and to think about what the implications are for this issue and what it needs to do to improve or what others need to do. We also have bring you a survivor of trafficking, who is very clearly someone who has been motivated by her own experiences to establish a footprint to Freedom, which is an organization that aims to provide a greater voice to those who have been trafficked and reside now in Europe, and has to think through where the gaps in policy are, what happens on that journey, and to think through what the implications are for policy development as we move this forward. And so it gives me great pleasure that we have these number of perspectives, and we'll be starting with a member state. It gives me great pleasure that we've brought to you a Minister for Asylum and Immigration from Greece, a member state that's very close to the issue. One of the member states that actually has high levels of asylum and immigration cases, etc., and the volume of numbers. As we know, if you've read the headlines over the past 24, 36 months, that's been a major issue for Greece. So I'm very pleased, firstly, to welcome Notis. Notis, very, very pleased to have you with us. You're on mute, Notis. I just need you to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Great.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate in this discussion alongside with other distinguished speakers from EU institutions and civil society.
No, it's a real pleasure.
Human trafficking is indeed an important topic and has been one of the main priorities of the migratory policy of the Greek government, following a strict but fair migration policy in line with European and international law, distinguishing between those entitled to international protection from those that are not. Our firm objective is to cut off the networks of smugglers that exploit the ignorance, the dreams, and the needs of people from around the world to come and live in Europe, but at this time, taking substantial risk on the way. We should not allow smugglers to continue. However, Europe should need to do more in legal migration, offering paths to people to come to Europe. We don't want a closed Europe. We want people to be able to come here, but come in a legal way. We have sadly witnessed on several occasions how this long journey can end up in dramatic events in the middle of the sea, being the Aegean or the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. And according to Europol, more than 90% of migrants traveling to the EU are using facilitation services. And in most cases, these services are provided by criminal networks. In this sense, the Greek government and I personally are fully engaged against the action of the networks, and we have set very high on our agenda the fight against this form of organized crime at a national, European, and international level. Allow me to explain in which ways. First, by protecting our borders, securing the borders of Greece and the European Union, working alongside Frontex, in line with international and European law. Also, the relevant Greek authorities, the Hellenic Police and the Hellenic Coast Guard, the dedicated work of which I should fully praise, have launched the National Operating Plan Against Smuggling in close cooperation with Europol. Since 2016, Europol is operating in the 5 Aegean islands that have suffered most of the pressure from the migratory flows. In parallel, Greece is participating in a series of European programs and initiatives, such as the EMPACT, aiming at the exchange of information and the execution of joint operation and investigation, as well as the joint operational team MARE in the framework of the European migrant smuggling networks. Our cooperative efforts focus on the sea borders, but also on the so-called Balkan corridor. More recently, we were very pleased to join, together with other EU member states and countries of the Western Balkans, the Austrian initiatives for the Eastern Mediterranean platform through the creation of the operational centers in Vienna. We believe that combating secondary flows also help combating primary flows, and I think that's a very responsible way to tackle illegal migration. We were among the signatories of the Vienna Declaration, and I had the opportunity during my participation to the conference to discuss with other member states how we can work together. Similarly, we do so at the Council of the European Union, as all the member states in Europe are focused in combating the smuggling networks. Ahead of the presentation of the new European Pact on Migration and Asylum by the Commission, currently under negotiation, Greece presented a year ago a comprehensive paper on disrupting migrant smuggling networks. 1 year later, we keep on emphasizing the need for a collective action against this increasing phenomenon, including in the context of the ongoing discussion of EU policy on migration and asylum. Finally, we are including this topic in all our bilateral talks with third countries of origin and transit for migrants. In our case, it is important, the role of Turkey, and we welcome their efforts to fully abide with the 2016 joint statement, which is critical for dismantling smuggling networks in countries outside the European Union. These are my opening thoughts, and I look forward to listening to the other speakers and participating in the debate.
Notis, thank you very much for that. The question I have in my mind for you, and perhaps what I would ask you to bring you back on this question is, given where you are, given the intersection of borders and international laws and regulations, and what happens when someone comes into a reception area, and we know there are multiple responsibilities that are not just domestic, what we really want to understand is how can we improve that entry point and that journey point, which has both a domestic responsibility, a Europe-wide responsibility, but also international. So I'll come back to you on that because I think it's important to make sure we do so, because that's, I think, we need to understand, as I said from the start, how do we improve things. Before I bring in our next speaker, I just want to make sure that all of you are savvy with the Zoom protocol. I can see from the audience here, you've all got your names on, you're on mute, and what I'd ask you to do is, if you wish to come in, just raise your virtual hand, and then we'll take you accordingly. I also want to, as I said earlier, welcome our live stream audience. We don't leave you out at all. A very warm welcome to you. You can join this conversation. What you need to do is post your question or query on hashtag FOE debate so that we can take you also. I'd also like to remind you, we have the Zoom chat. It's a very, very useful tool for all of you to be able to post your comments, your queries, your thoughts, ideas, or response to what you're hearing from these speakers, because this is ultimately about engaging in a dialogue and debate and a discussion about how we move things forward, not simply thinking about deconstructing the problem itself. So welcome to all of you. Those are the rules. And before I kind of invite Malaika, who, as I said earlier, she's a survivor of trafficking herself, and that was motivated to establish Footprints to Freedom. And the one thing I'd say, I've heard what the minister said, but I've also know there's an interesting fact that I wanted to share with you. The human trafficking is a really lucrative business. Almost 30 billion, round about 30 billion in profit for this issue, for criminals and others. But the cost to society, as estimated, is around 3 billion. So you go and figure, when you've got that cost-benefit analysis, are we questioning why we don't do more in this territory? Are those figures telling insofar as the profit and the cost in this debate. I just raised that because we know what the nature of the problem is, we know what the responsibilities are, and we know what the human cost is. And on that note, I want to invite Malaika. Malaika, thank you very much for joining us. A very warm welcome. Warm welcome to you. Thank you for being here and sharing with us, not necessarily your story, but from your experience and what you understand that's happening to other victims of trafficking and survivors of trafficking. Share with us what you think are where the points of failure are of the system. Where do people fall through the net of support? What happens both in country that you start from, but then when you actually come to Europe? So over to you. I know it's a tall order in 5 minutes, but do your best. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invite and giving me a platform to share my survivor perspective. But before I go ahead in that, I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate the efforts that have been put in place around Europe to address the overwhelming problem of migration. I know it's ambiguous and confusing. Having said that, when we're addressing the problem of migrants being at risk of human trafficking, we need to look at human trafficking with the question of injustice. This question will help us ask ourselves these questions. Why are people leaving their countries? What are the underlying causes that make people leave their homes to take these unknown journeys to expose themselves to psychological and mental torture that even ends up making them at risk of human trafficking? To that, I see that most of the anti-smuggling and anti-human trafficking efforts are being put in place, but a lot of emphasis is being put on the criminal aspect of the problem. This means that the human and the practical aspect of the problem does not receive enough attention. For example, as a survivor of human trafficking to me disguises itself as an opportunity of a lifetime, just as so many migrants. From childhood, I grew up seeing injustice, war, and violence against women, and famine, and all the violence that comes with vulnerability. This left me vulnerable to human trafficking already as a child. The socio-economical and political situation made me already vulnerable. So as a young, desperate girl looking for safety and education, when a trafficker came in and offered me an alternative, it was easy for me to be lured. I ended up being sold out in Europe to be pimped out and left me in a serious debt bondage that I had to pay off my freedom. For this reason, for policies to be truly effective, they also need to reflect on the underlying causes that makes people to migrate. Moreover, I think we should look beyond raising awareness about human trafficking, but also partner with local organizations and governments to promote pre-migration interventions or offer alternatives to migration livelihoods among women and girls that are likely to migrate, and also those who have returned. And alongside the migration routes, there's limited access to formal information about the legal pathway to legal migration. What I've realized that most of the information that is there is really tailor-made by traffickers and smugglers themselves, which makes the message to come in as biased. One of the key questions we hear from people getting on the while migrating is that don't trust the police. Europe doesn't need you. And when you report this case, you're going to be detained. So this already makes migrants at risk of human trafficking. Also, when identifying victims among migrants, we should do away with the concept of looking for a perfect victim among victims. There's no such a thing like a perfect victim. What I see is that in most countries in Europe, the victim position is put towards helping the prosecution of traffickers without considering what are the future repercussions of this victim. So like the law does not really protect victims, it just needs to catch smugglers and traffickers. I want to conclude on this remark that I would like us to reflect on these policies as a context of nature and plant. When the plant does not grow, in an environment. We fix the environment at which that hinders its growth, not only the plant. What I see with policies is just that they focus on the plant without looking at the root cause why people migrate in the first place. So I believe that should the day ever come that human trafficking ceases to exist, it's not going to be that traffickers or smugglers have stopped taking advantage of people, but because of the collective effort that have been put in place, that is not discriminative, and it's also long-term. And we should also look at engaging survivors in implementing in research and coming up with policies, because survivor narrative is very significant in coming up with the best strategies and combating human trafficking, because they have lived experience. And without their narrative, we do not know if our programs or our policies are trauma-informed or they are culture-informed. With that being said, I want also to mention that we need also to tackle the demand of Europe having the need to exploit, the demand of exploitative services. I became a victim of human trafficking because of gender-based, gender-specific demand of sexual exploitation. So if we do not tackle the demand and legalization of prostitution in Europe, a lot of vulnerable migrants are going to end up falling in this cycle. Yeah, that is it.
Malaika, thank you. Thank you very much. There's a lot in what you've said, but that key message about try and think about the root causes rather than just the process of trafficking, but also how do you tackle the notion, which is quite an ugly side of Europe, I suppose, is the demand for trafficked individuals. Our economies, obviously informal economies, rely on it. As I said, upwards of 30 billion as a profit, and you see the cost has been determined as being just around 3 billion. So there's something about what Europe needs to look and not turn a blind eye as we've framed this debate. We're now going to show you a short video, which are testimonials from individuals who've made the journey and have experienced difficulties, simply to be able to understand better what some of those stories tell us in terms of the gaps or the issues that we need to deal with. So I'm just waiting for that video to be teed up. It should be on our screens. And again, I remind you, use the Zoom chat function for your comments, and also if you want to raise any questions, use your virtual hand. I think it's about to start now.
As a survivor of human trafficking, I think we need to have things changed. When my investigation procedure stopped, everything stopped. We need to have a place in system that is not discriminating. This is very bad. I have been homeless so many times. To be honest, sometimes I've been so desperate and tempted to go back into prostitution because at least the people give me food and shelter. Survivors need legal representation. I feel because I don't have money to pay the lawyer that I'm not taken seriously. My case has been going on for 14 years. Also, I think the people working in healthcare need to be trauma-informed and culturally sensitive. I don't feel I'm being taken seriously by my doctor or psychologist anymore. Something needs to be done.
Hello, my name is Kendall Alimo. I am an international activist based out of Chicago, United States. I'm a professionally trained artist, I'm a clinical educator, and I'm a survivor of child trafficking. What survived is my voice, and I'm using it here today to call on you, my friends of Europe, and my friends around the world. I call on you today to take swift action to create pathways to true liberation for those still enslaved today. I call on you to bravely turn towards these dialogues and turn towards the trauma we often turn from in our communities. As an advocate in mental health care for this population, I'm very strong about the need to reform academic curriculum at universities across the globe that are not requiring trauma-informed curriculum and do not have the curriculum to enable clinicians to treat the unique pathology of survivors. We are seeing a high rate of complex PTSD and dissociative symptomology within this population. And without treatment, we're losing lives. How do we treat dehumanization? How do we treat modern-day slavery? How do we, as clinicians, work with survivors of these experiences in a way that's human and makes them whole? At those same universities, I call on universities across the globe to create seats in classrooms for survivors to sit in, to obtain an education, to obtain employment, and to obtain economic independence. And when that happens, we know it eliminates the vulnerability of re-exploitation throughout their lifetime. I call on you today, my friends, to not merely ask for survivors' stories, but to ask for survivors' solutions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ada Bernadette Solution. I am an independent consultant human sex trafficking in the Netherlands. I help organizations in making projects that prevent human sex trafficking go bigger in the Netherlands. And I help survivors in getting to know their authentic self. One thing that I hope for survivors in the future is that they will get linked to a social worker that takes her time in getting to know them. They have to understand that the voice of the evil ones in our head are much louder than the voice of the good ones that trying to help us get back in line. I hope that in the future, survivors will be seen more and helped more. For survivors, when they come back in society, most of the times they are in debt, they don't have a house, they're miseducation, and I hope that we can help them in that area. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
Hi, my name is Blessing Oluwarantimi Oluwatimileyin. I am a Nigerian based in United Kingdom, a victim of human trafficking, who has been trained to become a survivor leader, teacher, spiritual and physical therapy or counselor, and about to be the CEO of Survivors Voice Organization. I want to be a voice for the survivors all over the world. As a survivor, I realized that turning blind eye to our needs always brings us into deep stress and depression. The NROM delayed in responding to victims and survivors. Being in United Kingdom for so many years, someone like me, I've been here for the past 15 years, I'm not allowed to work. It's so stressful. I'm actually on medication. So this is what they need to look into, at least to give some survivor their lives to be human being among the humans. Humans among the humans. We are human beings, we want to live. Thank you.
Colleagues, very, very powerful testimonials. And I hope you agree, this wasn't, our objective was to show you powerful people with powerful stories, but actually people who have changed their lives and made a difference, not only to themselves, but also to a wider community. And in what you heard were some very clear recommendations of what could happen. But I think the most important takeaway is that you heard the stories of very powerful women in particular, who are the main subject of this issue, but not from the point of victimhood, but actually from a solution focus, but actually people who created strength from their adversity, but at some cost and some pain. So I'm really grateful to all of the participants in that testimonial for sharing their stories with us in the way that they have. I want to open up the debate briefly before I go on to our remaining speakers. I'll bring in Frontex, obviously, and the European Commission shortly, but are there any particular reactions to what you've heard so far in terms of not the kind of sense of how awful it is, but more in case of like, what do you think some of the solutions might be? You've had two very, very effective contributions, a Minister of State and someone who's been a victim who's actually created something. Put your virtual hands up if you want to come in. And as I said, also use the Zoom chat and hashtag FOE debate for those on live stream. I know Ilyas wants to come in. Ilyas?
Thank you.
Ilyas, thank you for joining us. Please do introduce yourself and your question or query or comment.
Thank you very much. I'm representing the United Nations Office Against Drugs and Crime, and I'm based in Vienna. Our office is the guardian of the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and the Protocols Against Trafficking and Smuggling, which are the only international instruments against these crimes. So first of all, allow me to say also that I'm very humbled by the testimonies that we heard from the women that spoke before me, and I'm very grateful for the words. I think this is what we all have to keep in mind when all of us that are working against this issue, against this crime. I just want to say one or two points that may help the discussion also. Trafficking and smuggling interject, and there's a fusion of these crimes in many cases, especially in countries of transit. However, they are distinct crimes, and they need different responses. Sealing of borders and police measures do not address trafficking in persons alone. There needs to be also a system of support for an identification and support of trafficking victims along the way. This is something also the European Parliament actually recognized recently in its resolution on trafficking in persons. So that's the first point, which I think is quite important. Second, I think that trafficking in persons, as our recent report showed, remains a global problem. It's not a problem of well-resourced countries or for low-resourced countries. It affects everyone. Women and girls remain the majority of the victims. Sexual exploitation is the most prevalent form of exploitation, followed by forced labor, but also forced begging, child begging, child soldiers, organ removal, drug trafficking, drug cultivation, a myriad of other types of trafficking. And 1 in 3 victims globally is a child. And this is extremely important to know.
Ilyas, but from your perspective, sorry to interject, because I said this is about moving forward and focused on practical solutions or ideas. You sit at the heart of something where you get an overview and a very important agency. What do you think needs to change? What do we need to improve if we're not going to have those numbers that you quote, which have been those numbers for quite a few decades? We've been living with these numbers for many, many generations. Tell us, what do we need? We're in the 21st century, and we've gone through the biggest crisis of our lives. What should be that which should create a different emotion and reaction to some of these things? What needs to happen?
First, there needs to be continuous attention to this crime. It needs to be really seen as what it is, which is exploitation of humans by other humans. So it needs to be seen for what it is. It needs to be a very serious crime. So because we see very low levels of conviction, traffickers basically walk or get a fine for what is really human trafficking. And there needs to be much more attention to the people that survive this crime, to the victims of trafficking persons, who should be brought in, because the more we work with these victims, the more we are able to address this crime. And third, and most important, international cooperation is extremely important. A lot of trafficking is cross-border. It is fused with migrant smuggling, with migration and refugee flows, and this needs also to be addressed.
But Ilyas, and not for you to respond to, but perhaps put on the Zoom chat, is that clearly that third point is about politics. And it feels that, given what we've known for decades about this issue, that it just doesn't seem to get onto the to-do list of politicians as a major international issue. Because if it were, then we might have a different approach to it. So just your views on the politics of this, in terms of how do we make sure this doesn't become something that politicians get a sense of, oh my God, this what a painful problem. But actually, we've got economies to run, and you actually seem to lose this issue in that let's say in that discussion and negotiation. Thank you very much, but do address that question in the Zoom chat. I want to go to Sabine. Sabine, you've been patient. Sabine Vent.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you indeed. Welcome. Please do introduce yourself and your question.
My name is Sabine Wenz, and I'm the director for a regional program called Better Migration Management, which is actually addressing or tackling similar questions in the region of the Horn of Africa, where people get smuggled, get trafficked, often with the aim to go to Europe, but often also just with the aim of escaping where they come from. And my feeling is that, and actually my experience is that what we invest in anti-trafficking and strengthening the structures that can then maybe deal with that, criminal structure states, but then also on the issue of protection. And our experience is that this issue of protection becomes a really tangible issue when we involve survivors or victims of trafficking in the creation of structures or of services that can then help people along the road to where they fall victim. Malaika said it very well. It's not just like one picture, one way to fall into these structures and get trafficked and become a victim, and then lately also a survivor. But there are several ways, and we need to really look along the line on that too. And my feeling is sometimes when we are addressing the issue of traveling to Europe, that we just put too much focus on how to actually address the criminal side and not to really look at what the victims,
So Sabine,
where they start from.
Okay, Sabine,
Yeah.
what are you saying therefore? That like we heard from Ilyas, make the crime fitting and make it stick so that it becomes a deterrent. Is that what you're saying also?
No, that's exactly the opposite. I'd rather like looking at the victim and showing where did that start? I mean, how do people become victims, and what kind of maybe illusions or also expectations they have in order to get themselves into the hands of traffickers? Because that is very often.
Yeah. Okay, I get your point. So you're very much in the case of look at the root causes, but that requires a multi-fold strategy that deals with poverty, corruption in the country of source, and a whole range of other factors. But why not? And you're absolutely right. Thank you very much, Sabine, for your commentary. Maria Laura.
Hello.
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 Please do introduce yourself and your point.
Yes. My name is Maria Laura Conte. I am the communications director of ASI Foundation, an international NGO based in Italy. And my point is this one. I think that there is an important aspect in the reason why someone decides to begin the path of migration. And we have to focus on this aspect, because here I think we have the elements to decide an effective prevention of this phenomenon. I think because we have to fight the crime, as we have heard, but we have to prevent, as Malaika said. And prevention passes through, I think, two important ways. The first is information, of course, but the other is alternatives, building alternatives of job creation, of education, because there, at the beginning of the path, there are I think the sensitive points where we can work on. But I would like to get a perspective from the speakers about this idea of prevention, because thank you.
No, Maria, thank you. And part of that also begs the question about there's so much international money that goes into some of the source countries, and how much of that is actually being used to create those alternatives that you suggest. I'm going to finish with one further contribution before I bring in the Director General, Monique. Melita?
Thank you for the invitation for this important event. I just want to
introduce yourself, would you?
Yes, sure. I'm sorry. I'm Melita Gruevska-Graham, and I'm the head of the anti-trafficking program of the International Center for Migration Policy Development, ICMPD. I just want to reflect on an important point that Malaika made at the very beginning, and that is on the link between migration and trafficking and the reason why people migrate. ICMPD has been conducting empirical research on the phenomenon of human trafficking in dynamic mixed migration context and humanitarian crisis since 2014. And one of the main findings of our research is that we need a paradigm shift of how trafficking, refugee migration, and child protection policies are viewed in terms of access to protection. While policymakers and practitioners might see themselves as working in distinct fields on specific topics, the human beings in need of protection do not always fall under one single clear-cut category. People on the move are vulnerable because of their need to move, and because this means that they often simultaneously hold multiple legal statuses. They can be refugees, internally displaced persons, irregular migrants, or trafficked people. In order to avoid a situation where such girls and boys, women and men fall through the cracks of state policy and legislative frameworks just because they do not fit into one specific category, the anti-trafficking stakeholders must collaborate closely with the stakeholders working on internal displacements, on international protection, on child protection, and also on migrant smuggling.
So basically a better multi-agency, multidisciplinary approach, which is almost like a one-stop shop around the individual, rather than the individual having to wire themselves to various agencies and not knowing who to trust. Thank you very much for that point, and a very clear message about what might happen at the front end or the entry point, but also at the point of source. On that point, and before, I know there are a couple of people who want to come in, quite a few of you. I want to bring in Monique now, because I think it's a fitting time to hear from her. Monique, very warm welcome to you. Hello. You need to unmute. Hello.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Do you hear me?
I do. We do indeed. Thank you very much for joining us, Monique. You've heard a lot, and
yes, I've heard a lot, and I've heard a lot of very. I've heard.
I think we have. Those of you who are not on mute, please mute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've heard a lot of very sensitive things, and I was in charge of humanitarian aid before being a director of migration. So I've seen the issue on both sides. And I can see that it's very much linked to migration, but it's also so much linked to what Malaika was saying, to vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And when people are vulnerable because they are poor, because they are subject to violence, because for many reasons, because they have to be displaced, then obviously they are very prone to being the prey of traffickers. So also what Malaika said, which is so true, human trafficking is a crime, mm-hmm. and we need to address this aspect. So maybe a few considerations that I would like to bring in this debate.
Yes, but Monique, if I can say to you, if you would be helpful to focus on what do you think needs to happen and what are you doing to improve the situation?
So we are preparing. I was coming to that. We have been working on human trafficking for more than 10 years already, and we are now about to propose a new strategy mm-hmm. that will be issued in a couple of weeks. That will precisely address what we've heard so far, and which wants to give a comprehensive response to address both the victims' needs that was highlighted, and in particular on the psychological and mental and also social support on that, to propose measures to break the criminal business model, because as I said, it's a crime, and it's a very profitable crime, and mm-hmm. it creates a lot of money, and that's why it's also so flourishing, because it is a very good business. So we need to break this business model, and also to allow fighting the impunity of the perpetrators, because there is very little impunity for those who traffic human beings. So that's what we want to address. This new strategy will also be gender, child-specific, and victim-centered. It will address all forms of exploitation with a strong focus on sexual exploitation, because it's large part and a large reason of the trafficking. You have labor trafficking, which is largely men, trafficking of men, but you have obviously women, but sexual trafficking is largely women, mm-hmm. children, fortunately, and we have to address that on the gender dimension of the human trafficking. It's also our intention to address the challenges of the digital era, because we've seen also, in particular with the current pandemic situation, that that human trafficking has flourished, and sexual abuse has flourished online. So we need also to address that and to see that this new online world we are working in is not facilitating and promoting and widening this crime. And finally, we will look also into the legal framework. You know, may not know, we have a directive on human trafficking and human beings that we want also to assess how it has been implemented in the different member states and what needs to be done on that. Since we don't have much time, I would like to make a point also on the way we want to address more specifically the issue of human trafficking in the migration context.
Yes.
You know that we have issued our pact on migration in September last year. This is only part of the picture. In this pact, we want also to better identify from the moment migrants arrive at the EU borders, to better identify those that have been subject to human trafficking and to sexual exploitation, and that are particularly vulnerable or could be particularly prone to human trafficking. So that's part of what we want to identify with this screening procedure and the border procedure we want to introduce. We will include also, we are also working on the smuggling side of it, because most of the people that arrive illegally to the EU for the moment are people that are the prey of smugglers. And we are also preparing an action plan against migrant smuggling that will address also these issues in trying to reduce and work together with the third countries of origin on how to reduce the smuggling of people and to address this criminal kind of activity. The pact also includes integration measures, and we also came in the autumn with a plan on integration, how to better integrate migrant people with a migration background, including on the particular aspect of the most vulnerable, and in particular women and children, so that they can better integrate in our societies, and that their specific needs are better taken into account. A last point I would like to mention, we will also look into those who use and abuse of people vulnerable, and in particular the employers, people who employ people that have been subject to trafficking. So we will be looking into the Employer Sanctions Directive, which obliges member states to provide for criminal penalties for employment of third country nationals in an irregular situation and who are subject in particularly exploitative working conditions, or when the employer knows that the worker is a victim of trafficking of human beings. So that's very quickly
sure, I
summed
know,
up
I understand.
what we have on the table. But I also take the point, 2 points that were mentioned before. We need to prevent, because we need to address the needs of people that have been victims of trafficking. But a very important point also is also to prevent that. And that's why we need to work on reducing smuggling, on addressing the perpetrators and bringing them to court. And also, there was another point I wanted to say, but I forgot.
Don't worry, Monique. We're running out of time anyway. But thank you. No, thank you for sharing with us what will come out. And it sounds, on the face of it, you've kind of looked at all the different issues that we need to be thinking about when we think about the what happens and what happens within country and in the journey. And you've looked at employment and all the other different factors. And, you know, as you say, most of the people that do the smuggling or the trafficking are suffer very little impunity. But the point that I think that stands out for me, and I think some people have said, is that Ilyas and others referred to this, is that there's a need to look at development aid approaches. So there's something about your brothers and sisters in the different directorate generals to think about their international development and funding, the kind of economic investment that goes in that helps to prevent the situation. But what I'd like to say, one of the recommendations that we've made to the Commission through our articles and publications is that what really needs to happen is that you need to establish an EU task force. And it sounds like a bland statement, but actually, when you think about what others have said here, you need a multi-agency, multidisciplinary approach that won't happen by itself. You need to kind of drive and lead this by having a task force that brings together both the different agencies within the Commission, with the Commission, including Frontex, including Interpol and others, into the mix, so you can really drive home a message of importance about this issue. There's something for you to think about, and I'll bring you back. But on that note, I want to bring in Anna, who's been very patient, from Frontex. A very warm welcome to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from
Good
Warsaw.
afternoon. Yes, thank you for joining us. You know, Frontex has been in the limelight for a number of reasons, but we're here today to talk about the agency and the role that you play. You play a very significant role in terms of your responsibility for border resources and management. Tell us, you know, you've heard a lot, and actually from you have a unique vantage point, Anna, because you can see what happens at the reception centres, at the border controls, and the various responsibilities. If you can, be as frank and honest with us about what could change and what needs to happen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to this debate. This is an area where the agency has been focusing very much its attention and developing a lot of different products and capabilities in-house. And I think, if you allow me, I would like to start a little bit sharing from different perspectives what we have been developing so far, because this is in the core of how we can contribute on one hand to the fight of this trafficking and smuggling, but on the other hand also to identify the victims in the very early stage. As you know, we have our joint operations. We have operations at the external borders, and these are focused on protecting the external border, but with different components. And one of the elements that we have been developing very much, it's the one of preventing and tackling the trafficking in human beings while implementing our activities in these areas. There is an operational concept that has been developed that considers the path between the countries of origin and the countries of destination. As often women and children, as we heard here also from Malaika, become victims of sexual abuse even along the route, and not only after they arrived in the EU. We have different capabilities, as I mentioned, and we try to make use of all of them to raise our awareness, to better train our officers, and to raise more awareness into the possible situations that officers will come across when they are performing their duties at the external border. And to that, we use, for instance, our network of liaison officers and the ones that we are still building on at the third countries. And we cooperate in different projects that are in place also with non-EU countries in this area of fighting the trafficking on human beings. We have different projects in the area of capacity building, where we work closely together with different agencies in order to create synergies and exchange better information and raise better awareness. And I can talk about CEPOL, Europol, Eurojust, but also with IOM, UNODC, and other agencies and organizations all worldwide, in order to develop training products and also capacity building projects that can support non-EU countries and EU countries to work together in fighting this phenomenon. We have developed along the years, and I'm going to quote some of the projects that we had, but one of them, for instance, which is quite well known and has been in place now for several years, is our project Vega Children. This consists of a handbook that has 3 different approaches for the different types of borders, because we talk about different types of routes, different types of crimes. This project was developed in straight cooperation with civil society and NGOs. And every year we put in place operational activities where we invite these specialists from these NGOs to join our operations and to become part of this project in a very active way, supporting the officers in better understanding this phenomenon.
Okay, and I need to sum up because I'm running out of time. I mean, what you're, and I say this very respectfully, I really do, in the sense that what you're setting out, it seems like there's a number of things happening. But when you see the video, when you know about the numbers, when you know that actually it's a multi-billion trade operation, and we know that you know, people who are smugglers and traffickers get through the system that you're responsible for, as with domestic governments as well. Tell us, I mean, if you can, just why is it that these traffickers are able to know the system so well and get away with it? What do you need if you have to have the power and the resources to actually do this job better?
It's a quite complex phenomenon because, well, let's say, if I may use this more common languages, the big fishes, they are not coming with the victims. When you are working at the border, you catch eventually the facilitators, which are normally the small fishes. We are investing very much in identifying the victims because, well, there is a saying that if you don't have a victim, you don't have a case. So if you better train the officers to identify the victims in order to collect in the very, very early stage all the evidence, the stories, the routes, how they were trafficked by the organizers, how their story went, like Malaika explained to us all the story where she went through, but you have to detect this in the very early stage to be able to collect the best evidence, the best information that you can provide to the authorities that are responsible for investigation, because, you know, Frontex does not do investigation.
Indeed.
But we can help the ones that do investigation. We can help the ones that can prosecute in the future, the networks that are working in this type of organized crime.
Absolutely, Anna, and that's my point, is that's why we made the recommendation for a task force, because if you have an EU-wide task force that brings you with Interpol and the other agency, we might have a better chance of sharing data, because when I spoke to senior police officers across Europe, one of the biggest issues is they don't have the data, it's not shared. And it seems like if you really are serious about this, having some sort of multi-agency task force on this, led by the likes of Monique and others, that can really hunker down on the problem, might be a solution. But we'd welcome your thoughts on that. But thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for joining us. And I think this debate will continue. But in the short time I've got, and I'm going to crave your indulgence just to go over by 5 minutes, if I may, is to first ask. I want to bring Notis. Notis, I want to bring you back, if I may. You've heard a lot, and you know you're a Minister of State, and you know what other politicians are thinking about this issue. Give us your reflection on what you've heard so far and what you think could be improved amongst your colleagues politically on this issue.
First of all, let me be clear. For us, it's a very serious crime, human trafficking. And the President of our Republic was in Parliament a few months ago to demonstrate how important it is for us to discuss trafficking. We need to work along two pillars, and I think that's what came from the debate today. One pillar is prevention, and prevention means working in the countries of origin, protecting the borders, fighting smuggling networks, because as Ilya said, they're interject. They're different crimes, but they're interject. The second thing is the work we do on the ground, and making sure that everyone that arrives goes through the border procedure and is well recognized. And then you give the individuals the opportunity, through all the interviews we do with the Asylum Service, EASO, and Frontex, to understand each person coming through, and then have the opportunity to explain to victims that they have an alternative. They have the ability to apply for asylum and be accepted, and then offered integration program and support, and therefore break the business model of traffickers. Because when we fight the cause routes, but if still people come to Europe, we offer them legitimate ways and support through our legal framework to get legal residence and access to employment and support, then that is something that fundamentally kills the business model of those that are trying to use other people for profit.
Notis, thank you very much. I think you reinforced the point, actually, of the need for a multi-agency, multi-pronged approach that's led by somebody that actually achieves the things that you're describing, because otherwise it will be a very entrepreneurial member state that says, actually, we're not going to take this on in this way. We're going to treat it very seriously in an important way. But actually, there's an interdependency to this across member states. And actually, you need some sort of coming together of the different aspects to be able to hunker down this problem, as we said, in terms of an EU-wide task force. I'm going to bring in 4 people before, and I ask all of you that I'm going to invite to be really brief, if I may. And Malaika, I'm going to end with you, if you don't mind. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I want you to reflect on what you've heard so far and whether it gives you hope or disappointment. Be frank. But you're not that I'm placing the whole issue on your shoulders, by the way. It's because I just want to understand, what does it feel like to have heard what you've heard? Filippo Cori, are you still there?
Yes. Can you
briefly?
Hear me?
I can indeed.
Yes,
briefly.
Thank you, Philippe Corey from UNICEF Regional Office for Europe and Central Asia. I mean, I'd like to ask the speakers, well, we have seen that the children are the most vulnerable in this context. And so what are their commitments, their specific commitments to protect children in this context? That would be really interesting.
Excellent. And I'll ask the speakers to, if they can, respond on Zoom chat, because I won't have time to bring them in. If I can, I will, but I don't think I will. Adam Elsod. Adam, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for all the presenters. Shortly, I just want to say we have to differentiate between smuggling and trafficking, although many times they are interconnected. Mixing both in the same pot doesn't do justice to either. Okay. We cannot possibly think as the same experience of a trafficked minor into forced into prostitution for years and an asylum seeker who took the boat for 2 hours as the same experience. Let's call it what it is. It's just much easier to the EU to handle this whole migration question as a trafficking problem, and we need to acknowledge the root causes of people moving and the agency of these people. Asylum seekers are not kidnapped and they are not forced by the smugglers to get on boats. They have the agency and they made the decision, because the other options are just more dire.
Okay, so you didn't introduce yourself. What's the organization? The Young Republic. What is that?
The Young Republic is a youth organization co-led with young refugees that work for the political participation of young refugees in European policymaking.
Great, thank you for your contribution. Lorenzo Di Stasi?
Yes.
Introduce yourself. Good evening. Introduce yourself and where you're from and your question.
Can you hear me?
We can indeed. Welcome. Yes.
Thanks. I'm a journalist, and I have a question for the Minister, Mitarachi, about the possibility to, since legal pathways are the most effective way to stop smuggling, if he and his government is willing to improve these legal pathways for migrants and asylum seekers, and also if he acknowledged the fact that NGOs that are present on the ground are also part of the solution and not part of the problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that you've heard Notis say, but Notis, if you want to come back on that point very briefly, I'm happy to bring you back in.
Very briefly, we need to find legal pathways in Europe, and that's something we are discussing with our European colleagues. Second, about NGOs, clearly they are very useful and they're helping us a lot on the ground, and 90% of the NGOs, if we can use a number, have been extremely constructive. There have been very rare cases. We had problems in cooperation, but that's not the basic scenario.
Thank you. I want to come back to Monique, and then Anna, and then finish with Malaika and Monique. Any last reflections on what you've heard so far? Or have you?
Yes. Well, it's difficult in a couple of minutes to resume and to,
no, sure. But what about this idea of having a multi-agency approach that actually tackles the issue? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, it can be a good idea. We have had for 10 years already an anti-trafficking coordinator, and we will continue with that. We have also proposed with the pact to have a comprehensive approach about migration and addressing the root causes of migration. So we work we work together with our colleagues from the other departments on all those different issues, and with the view to have a whole root approach of what takes people into this dangerous path, what takes people to leave their country, and to address that from the very beginning up to integrating them once they have been in the EU. I share what Notis said, that we need to organize legal migration pathways. This is also what we have proposed into the pact. So, you know, we have hundreds of task force, so I'm always happy to have, you know, structures that can
only with purpose. No, our objective wasn't to create a new administration.
You can have the most beautiful task force, and what is important is that we bring all the players together, and that we see results, and that we address the causes. And I remember now what I wanted to say before. Someone said we need to integrate the survivors into the solutions. And I think this is very true. We have to hear them more, and to get from them also what they really need, and what are they, because they have the experience, unfortunately, of this traumatic situation, how they, you know, what they can contribute to help us to find the best solutions.
Okay. Monique, thank you. Anna, just very briefly, very specifically on Philippe's point from UNICEF about the child and children, some of the most vulnerable at the borders. Can you say something about that in terms of what you think needs to happen?
Thank you very much. And this is an area where we have invested very much. I think this is the most difficult victim to detect at the border, because especially the small children, you really need, and this is why I was referring to some of the things we developed that are meant to raise awareness of the border guards, of the police officers, but not only, because we had actions also with airport authorities and airlines to be aware of what could be the behavior of a small kid if it is accompanied by someone that is trafficking the children, and not by someone that is supposed to be the family. So we have been raising this awareness in order to better identify and stop these children at the border, and to refer them to the authorities and the organizations that can then support them to overcome this situation, and more important, to take them away from the traffickers.
Anna, thank you very much. Thank you all. Malaika, over to you. I remember when you and I spoke, one of the most startling facts you shared with me was that, you know, other than the fact that, you know, you saw this as an opportunity, that the person that was escorting you had the Red Cross jacket on. They knew everybody at the airport, really well known. And actually, so therefore, everybody in the system, from the point of the bus journey into the airport, was turning a blind eye to what they knew was happening. Over to you, Malaika.
Yeah, after hearing from everybody, from the minister, from everyone involved, I see there've been a lot of effort put in place in prevention and protection. But like I mentioned, until we address the root cause of the problem, people are going always to remain vulnerable. That issue of traffickers disguising themselves as the most take advantage of the situation, because they already have this presence in the community. They have impunity. They work with family members. They work with the airport. And to disseminate this kind of impunity with smugglers and traffickers, we really need to go back to the grassroots and have good contacts with the people, just like from bottom up, get the right information. And with this, it's only going to be possible if we engage and work with survivors. But there's no ready-made survivor who has reached my state. What is happening is that most people want a quick fix. They put you through the process, you get rescued, then you're reintegrated, but they do not understand what it takes for a survivor to get empowered to come up and speak up. The legislations, the policies are not ready to invest in the recovery process. So in order for us to get sufficient information, we need really to invest in the recovery of survivors. But also, what I've also noticed is that we need also to invest in the aftermaths of exploitation.
Yes.
Recovery does not end when a person is rescued. It has been 17 years ago since I was rescued. I was a young girl, I'm now a woman. But I still have to struggle with a lot of psychological things that require long-term support. But there's no streamlined support that is ready to put there for long-term survivorship of survivors. At the same time, give them a stage that is kind of supportive enough for them to be able to be heard, to be listened to, and being taken as part of as a whole. Until we reach that stage that survivors are part of the process from the beginning. If you want to know what is the network, how do smugglers lure people into this situation, you need to talk to those people who have survived the experience. What IAM does is that they repatriate people, and they have a bad experience with the law, with anybody involved in their process, from recovery to repatriation. If we try to create a better repatriation, let's say, process, that a person is repatriated with dignity, it gives them the opening and the trust to give the quite of the information that will be required for us to improve the process. On my last note, I would want to remind you that survivors are the most significant stakeholders in the fight against human trafficking. Our experiences give us the first-hand knowledge into understanding where to tackle, where the gaps are. I'll just give you one last example. I did not know how this experience could have been vital. I was volunteering in a red light district. I was working with my colleague. And there was a client who was posing as a client talking to a woman working in the red light district. I immediately told my colleague that is not a client, that is a pimp. But then she asked me, how do you know? I said, it just comes with being into this experience that you just know. And it was later that they realized that, okay, with this insight that I have, it can help this girl to open up. So work with survivors, support them to recover so that they can help in the better response of human trafficking.
Malaika, a brilliant message to end on, in the sense that we've heard so much about prevention, which has an implication for economic and development aid policies from Europe and elsewhere into the source countries. We need to have a better multi-agency collaborative approach, one that actually works, not simply coming together for the sake of it. We need better data sharing. But you know, that excellent final point, you know, if you want to be able to solve the problem, work with those who've come out of it at the other end and have actually had the experience, as you say. Wouldn't it be fascinating to see police authorities having survivors and people who've come through the process to be working alongside beat officers to understand what is going on, to provide the intelligence and to actually think through what the processes are that, you know, where policy fails many people in this situation. Colleagues, Notis, Anna, Monique, Malaika, all of you, thank you all very much for contributing, being honest and frank and engaging with us on this. This isn't going to go away, but as we said from the start, this has to be a decade on which we turn the page on this, and actually much more about results, effective ways forward, and rather than not repeat what we've heard in the past 60 years on this subject. Thank you all very much. We look forward to seeing you again. What I'd ask you to do is watch out on our website. Our next event in this series will be around inclusion in the armed forces, in the military. So we have a major event on the 18th of March, post-patriarchal security, inclusion and equity for the other 55%. Again, another controversial debate. And I'm hoping that on the International Women's Day on the 8th, I'll be in a strategic conversation with Malaika for about half an hour. And I'm hoping to bring in someone from the African Union, if I can, or somewhere else, to have a conversation about what this really means on the international global stage. Thank you all very much. And this is Dharmendra Kanani, Director and spokesperson at Friends of Europe. And see you all again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Mind your distance and be safe. Bye-bye.